morning, morning, morning. Good morning. Good morning to you.
We want to start this morning's discussion with His Excellency David Comissiong, Barbados Ambassador to CARICOM. And he left us. You didn't see him last week because he was busy addressing the third session of the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, which was held at UN headquarters in Geneva. So good morning to you, sir. Welcome.
Good morning, Tisha. It's great to be back.
It's good to have you back. All right, so tell us first of all about the conference itself and why it was held.
Well, the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent is probably the newest United Nations agency. It was set up, it was established as one of the outcomes of the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent. And it's a 10-person forum. Two of those 10 persons are representatives of CARICOM. In fact, the current chair is Dr. June Suma of St. Lucia. So we feel very close to this forum. It is actually a forum for all people of African descent. So it's important that Barbadians, I mean, we have about a 95% African descended population. We get to know about this forum, and we support the work of this forum. So Barbados makes it a point of duty to be there when the forum holds a session so that we can give our solidarity and support. So I was there as Barbados's representative in Geneva last week, and I made a presentation on behalf of Barbados.
Generally, what else was happening around this? We're going to get to your presentation and, of course, share some of that. But what else was happening? I know there must be many moving parts when we talk about a forum like this and so many people from so many different places coming together.
Well, there were, of course, many of the representatives of the UN member states, representatives of all of the relevant UN agencies. For example, the United Nations Human Rights Commission. The forum actually advises the UN Human Rights Commission. So all of the relevant UN agencies, the working group of experts on people of African descent, the working group with responsibility for implementing the Durban Declaration, program of action. So it was a massive gathering. Not only the representatives of member states and UN agencies, but there were also 1,000 civil society representatives from 85 different countries. And of course, it was a 4-day forum from the 16th to the 19th of April. But in addition to the proceedings of the forum, there are all these side events. In fact, there were 85 different side events. So organizations take the opportunity to sort of piggyback on the sitting of the forum to hold all of these different side events. Everything, of course, to do with Africans and people of African descent, how, all of our issues. So every year there's this major gathering at UN headquarters, either in New York or in Geneva. Last year it was in New York. I also represented Barbados in New York. And it's a time really to have a global look at what is happening to people of African descent, Africans and people of African descent, and how United Nations agencies need to respond, how member states need to respond. So I took the opportunity in making my presentation to put on the table a number of items, and I am pleased to say that 4 of the 5 items that I put on the table were, embraced and taken up, and will find their way into the agenda of the permanent forum going forward.
Tell me about your thought process in getting to the place where you made this suggestion of these 5 things and saw them as the important things you needed to present in this forum at this time.
Yeah, well, it was quite easy for me because this is a journey that Barbados is on. You just spoke about the Liberian pilgrimage. So we Barbadians have embraced this Pan-African identity and this Pan-African destiny. And as you know, I've been on this path for almost my whole life.
Forever. Forever, that's the word.
So truth be told, the existence of this permanent forum is really one of the fruits of our efforts. This forum actually comes out of the United Nations World Conference on Racism in Durban, South Africa in 2001. That World Conference has been producing fruit, and this is perhaps just one of the latest fruit. And as you may know, Barbados, we played a big, big role in that World Conference Against Racism. It is really that World Conference Against Racism that has been the foundation for so many things. The current reparations movement, for example, the UN International Decade for People of African Descent. And incidentally, that decade is coming to an end this year. And the push is on now for a second decade because we feel that the UN was not serious enough about the first decade. Not enough was achieved during the first decade. And so people of African descent and several member states of the UN are pushing that the UN must declare a second decade where hopefully we will achieve greater concrete results.
All right, so we want to share a little bit about what you shared or how you shared at the forum. So let's take in the first extract.
Volume, they're hearing, but we don't
hear. States. Since 2012, you have also served as a member of the Barbados National Task Force on Reparations. Given your expertise and perspectives on reparations in CARICOM, can you please explain in what ways can reparations initiatives be structured to not only redress past injustices, but also foster long-term economic empowerment and social equity for individuals and communities of African descent? Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Permit me to begin by reflecting on that historic day of Monday, the 16th of September, 2013, the day on which governmental and civil society leaders of the Caribbean community, CARICOM, came together in Kingstown, St. Vincent, to fashion a CARICOM reparations campaign for the crimes of native genocide and African enslavement. Our CARICOM heads of government had met a couple months earlier and had made the historic decision to embark upon a reparative justice campaign against the relevant governments and institutions of Western Europe. And so, scores of us journeyed to St. Vincent to put the whole thing together. And one of the memorable things that we said at that historic Kingstown gathering was that the 21st century was destined to be the century of reparative justice. Indeed, we declared that we were embarking on a campaign in which we would be striving for a worldwide transformation of centuries-old relationships between the black, brown, and white peoples of the world. Relationships that tragically were and are still based on old but persisting patterns of discrimination, exploitation, inequity, and domination. relationships that are rooted in centuries of imperialism, colonialism, systemic racial discrimination, African enslavement, and native genocide. We were determined that our campaign would promote the sort of global justice that the world so desperately needs. Reparatory justice in all of its dimensions. Social justice, economic justice, climate justice, and that we would be striving for the new relationships.
Of course, that just set the tone for what the ambassador was going to talk about, giving really a history of the Caribbean's reparations drive.
No, the Caribbean has played such an important role in this modern reparations drive that I thought it was important to give the audience their little history lesson about the Caribbean's reparations campaign, but also to make it clear that our vision of reparations is not some narrow thing, you know, because a lot of people think of reparations as some kind of individual money payment. So I was making it clear that we are really talking about a transformation of the entire global system, a restructuring of relationships between the nations and peoples of the world. You know, our vision is that the world in which we live in today, many of the structures and practices are really rooted in those centuries of colonialism, imperialism, enslavement. And the reparations is about repairing, reforming, revamping that whole system, and to deliver to the black and brown people and nations of the world, what is their due, the justice that is due to them. So to put reparations in its broadest developmental context, for us it's really about addressing and redressing the historical legacies of underdevelopment that exists today and that are directly linked to those historical crimes of African enslavement and native genocide that were perpetrated by European governments, European companies, European families, etc. It's about that broad process of redressing these historical imbalances.
Now, I know this is on the side, and as we get prepared to listen to your next extract, how does all of this come into context as we hear that the governor of New York has secured $193 million for victims of the Holocaust in reparations?
Well, perhaps the most successful reparations campaign in the history of the world has been the Jewish reparations. And they have been very, very successful. In fact, you know, it's so amazing that the entire world seemingly, it was so easy for the world to recognize the legitimacy of the Jewish claim to reparations coming out of the Holocaust of the 1930s and 1940s. Yet there has been such diffidence in recognizing the claim of the black people of the world, who went through not 10 years of a Holocaust, who went through 300 years of the Holocaust of enslavement. And this is one of the paradoxes that has always concerned us. Why is it so easy to see that reparations were and are due to the Jewish people who went through that Holocaust, but it's so difficult for so many entities to understand that African people, that black people are due similar justice. So we use that to motivate us, to push on, and we know that our cause is grounded in fact, first of all, is grounded in law, but even more importantly, is grounded in righteousness and moral principle.
All right, so set up the second clip for us where you started outlining
Yes.
your 5 things.
Yes. Well, the second clip follows on from the idea of reparations, because I was given a presentation on reparations, sustainable development, and economic justice. So last year when I went to the forum, I put on the table from Barbados the idea of establishing, having the United Nations General Assembly establish a special international tribunal to adjudicate reparations claims. And so I was doubling down on that. It was accepted in principle last year, but I was using my appearance before the forum to reiterate that this is an idea that we must all get behind so that it becomes a reality.
All right, let's watch.
Number 1, full support for the proposal of this UN Permanent Forum on People of African Descent for the establishment of a new special international tribunal to adjudicate reparations claims and quantify reparations remedies. Yes, clap for that. We need such a special international tribunal on reparations because there is at present no international court properly equipped to deal with a reparations claim of the magnitude and complexity of our claim for reparations for hundreds of years of African enslavement. The closest that we have to such an institution is the International Court of Justice, but not only is the ICJ inadequate in terms of its design, it also suffers from the fact that many of the former enslaver nations have made reservations to the ICJ treaty, reservations that prohibit the ICJ from adjudicating crimes that they committed during the colonial era.
All right, so talk to us about this particular part of the presentation, really the start of your presentation of your top 5 things.
Yeah, well, this is very important because the Permanent Forum is really committed to reparations. In fact, the Permanent Forum is saying that what justice looks like in the 21st century for Africa, for people of African descent, is reparations. That there's no justice without reparations, that there's no sustainable development without reparations. So reparations is a big part of the agenda and program of the Permanent Forum. And so then we turn our attention to how do we realistically achieve reparations. Well, you know, we hope that we could do it with moral suasion and that we could sit down around a negotiating table and work it out like reasonable and rational people. But if that doesn't happen, then there must be a judicial settlement. And so the question arises, if we have to have a judicial process, what court do we go to? And as the case I was making there is that none of the existing courts are really ideal. And therefore, why don't we get the world community acting through the United Nations General Assembly to agree to establish a new specialized judicial tribunal specifically set up to adjudicate reparations claims. So this is something that I know that we are going to fight for, and hopefully we are going to achieve. But even if we don't achieve it, Tisha, the mere fact of making that campaign at the UN General Assembly is going to draw attention to the reparations idea. It is going to bring allies and supporters into our cause. But I am pretty confident that it can be achieved because, truth be told, the African and Caribbean, the black and brown nations of the world constitute the majority in the UN General Assembly.
All right, let's move on to point number 3 at the presentation.
Number 3, full support for the Bridgetown Initiative, that cutting-edge revolutionary plan that was crafted in Bridgetown, Barbados in 2022 to fundamentally reform the inherently unjust and unequal global economic and financial order. The Bridgetown Initiative, a fundamental component of the foreign policy of CARICOM, is calling for and working towards revamping of the structures and policies of all the international financial institutions in order to make them more inclusive and supportive of the black and brown nations and people of the developing world. It is working towards a massive expansion of the financial resources available to black and brown developing countries for the financing of critical development projects and for achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. For example, the Bridgetown Initiative is calling for the rechanneling of 100 billion in IMF special drawing rights from developed countries towards developing countries and towards funding mechanisms that support developing countries. It is also calling upon the multilateral development institutions to increase their lending for the achieving of the Sustainable Development Goals to $500 billion per year. It is calling for instituting the practice of according developing countries no less than 25 to 30-year repayment periods on their development loans. It is calling for the inserting of so-called debt pause clauses in the debt instruments of all developing countries, such that if the country is hit by a natural disaster, it will be entitled to put its debt payments on pause for a 2-year period while it takes steps to recover from the disaster. It is demanding that the industrialized nations pay a minimum of $100 billion per year into the UN's Climate Change Loss and Damage Fund to compensate our nations for the damage that they are currently experiencing from the global warming phenomenon that they did little or nothing to create.
And of course, you know, this is looking at the Bridgetown Initiative in a totally different light. The way you presented it shows how it really pours into the general drive for reparations.
Yes, I had to let them know that Barbados was in the house, and the Bridgetown Initiative, our flagship international project, was very much relevant to the entire, not just the reparations agenda, but the entire agenda of people of African descent. And so the Bridgetown Initiative is really helping to give concrete meaning to the global notion of reparations. It is because the Bridgetown Initiative is making specific demands, you know, for resources, resources that African and Caribbean, black and brown nations need if we are to achieve development, if we are to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. It is also making the case for climate justice, which is part of the reparations agenda. You know, the reparations idea is at the heart of the campaign for climate justice. You know, these European countries enslaved our people, set up these plantations, built this industrial economy out of that slave labor. That industrial economy has created the greenhouse gases that has produced the global warming that is now causing damage to the descendants of the same people that they enslaved to build the industrial economy. So fundamental justice says that they have to pay, they have to compensate us for the damage that we undergo as a result of the global warming. So all of these things are really interlinked, and properly understood, the Bridgetown Initiative is really at the center of a global reparatory justice vision for the world. And I am very keen that, you know, it is that initiative came out of Barbados, and we Barbadians, we must always be in the vanguard of promoting it, drawing attention to it, and, you know, calling on the international community to rally around it and to implement it. We must see it through to its ultimate destination. We have made some progress. For example, the debt pause clauses that there was so much applause for. We have gone some distance in getting that implemented, but of course there's still work to be done. So I was asking the Permanent Forum to embrace support for the Bridgetown Initiative as part of its agenda, and I'm pleased to tell you that that idea was totally accepted. So support for the Bridgetown Initiative going forward is going to be a central feature of the program of the UN Permanent Forum on People of African Descent.
Oh, that's excellent. Great work. And I think this is the first time we're going to do this, but we're going to field for you a question from a viewer. The viewer wants to know how you feel appearing at events like this on Barbados' behalf, considering this is your life's work.
Yes, well, yeah, you know, it is very fulfilling. I honestly feel very pleased and privileged to be living at this time, because so much of what I strove for and agitated for, you know, decades ago, I now see being embraced and coming to fruition. In fact, I met a Barbadian lady in Geneva last week, and she was honest enough to confide in me. She said, you know, years ago when I used to hear you on television with these things, I would stoop to my mouth and say, what, you know, what is he talking about? But I have come now, all these years later, to embrace that vision that, you know, that you were presenting, you know, and I'm so supportive now, you know. And so yes, you know, you've gone through that experience where sometimes you felt, you know, you're the lone boy on the burning deck, you're all alone. But look at it now. You know, reparations, embassies on the African continent, the African Export-Import Bank here in Barbados, the Liberian pilgrimage, a UN Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. It is all coming together, Tisha, and it's so wonderful to see it. And I'm so proud of my country, because Barbados has you know, been in the vanguard of so many of these very progressive developments.
And we're proud of you, especially because you were a lot of the times one of the only voices out there, you know, pushing all of this. And I'm happy that lady admitted. There are a few other people who need to admit too, but it's always good having you in. And what you said about the Sankofa pilgrimage is excellent, because that's a great segue into our next segment. Thank you, as always, for coming, and we look forward to hearing more about the work you're doing.
And thank you for your kind sentiments. Much appreciated.
Morning, morning.